policy and management. During his 13 years in industry, Dr. Laux served primarily in Tier 1 organizations and managed quality engineering, industrial engineering, and product design functions. During that time, Dr. Laux received multiple Six Sigma Black Belt certifications and conducted multiple continuous improvement projects. Join me as I welcome Dr. Child Laux.
Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it, and welcome to everybody here, and thanks for having me tonight. And I'm happy to be a part of with the laboratory. By background and training, I'm really an industrial engineer, so in my prior life, I would say it's a very exciting discipline. And at another time of day, I'll talk about the time that my engineers set our laboratory on fire, but tonight we'll talk about what I'm doing, what I and others are doing, and I've got a couple collaborators, and one of my students I saw is online, PhD students, and talk about what we're doing in our version of the system space. So I'm going to share my screen, and let me know if I go into presentation mode here.
Yes, we have you.
Okay, does everybody see the presentation mode screen? I'm going to talk about human trafficking and what it has to do with systems and some of the agenda. Got a lot of slides, but we can go through those, at ease. I want to make sure there's time for questions and answers, because how I came about this work was a little odd. I mean, it's not something, from my background and preparation, something that I would have engaged in, and at the university level, a long time ago. But it started off with being asked to put together our college's 150th anniversary event, and then current efforts were engaged in future plans that we have, and then a couple discussion points. So I'm going to start by trying to be a little engaging, and I don't have the chat window open, but I'm curious if people can use the chat to talk about, think about 3 types of human trafficking that they might be aware of. So let me go back into the chat and see if I can pull that up. Well, how about just some audibles? Does the crowd have any ideas as to the types of human trafficking that there might be? Sex trafficking, organ trafficking. Thank you, Jacqueline. Yes, those are 2 types. Child marriage, yes. Fantastic. Good.
What about forced service into military? Is that considered one?
So forced into the yes. Child soldiers forced in the military. Typically, they're children, but yeah, you'd be right. The varieties of methods or what people are trafficked into cover nearly every endeavor, both informal and formal labor, forced labor, we like to say. But it's acquisition of people against their will. And this is done through deception or fraud, force. But the idea is to really exploit people and take away really their personhood. And you can see on the screen there's a number of different exploitation ways, including the last one, domestic servitude. That one is more widely, that happens more widely than I think we often give credit for. In fact, I'll talk about our 150th event in a little bit. We brought a survivor. We call them survivors of trafficking. She was deceived into domestic servitude right here in Indiana onto IU's campus a number of years ago. So there's a lot of different ways that people are trafficked, and it's a growing problem. It's a big problem. About 30 million people are trafficked. It's a big business, and so later when we talk about using the terms business, it's definitely an industry. It shares characteristics that some of the world's best run companies share in terms of the capabilities. And second behind drug trafficking. So in terms of an illicit business, it's very large, and it's in every location, every locale, including right here in our backyard. So part of this is the term of modern day slavery, if it's appropriate or not. And it's a dichotomy, and it's a framework that I don't know if it recognizes what we have in today's society. I think if we, and I'm not just the only person that would think this way, is that if we think of it broadly in terms of we're removing the person's human dignity, we are taking that away from them. That's a catch-all term that serves to help people that may think they don't have a place in terms of studying human trafficking, to consider the idea from that large global challenge, human dignity, personal dignity. And so it's not just something you see in the movies, like with Liam Neeson in it or not, although that does happen. I think if we broaden the idea in terms of what it can be, that helps us first as citizens understand what we can do about it, and then us in the academy, what we might be able to do about it, because both can be definitely done. So what is central to human trafficking are supply and demand. We have push factors and we have pull factors, and we live in a globalized society and an economy that basically is pretty frictionless from a lot of avenues. Certainly from a financial standpoint, it has become very frictionless to move monies across borders. Of course, we've had supply chain hiccups over the last year due to COVID, but I saw a recent study that said some of the illicit supply chains, they do one thing well, which is they are flexible and they adapt. And they have adapted quite well to the phenomena and pandemic of COVID for the last 20 months. But some of the issues that come up are gaps. Really, if you want to think about it from my quality background, I think about it from variation, the extremes, the extremities, and income gap. In terms of it can be both a push and a pull. Conflict. A couple people on the chat mentioned conflict. That serves to push people out or perhaps pull people in. The variety of development among countries, and the fact that unease, that differentiation between countries that are more developed and less developed, also serves as an exploitation device for traffickers and people to be exploited based upon where they happen to live. Part of this is a curse of geography, really. And then finally, the demand that we all have for cheap goods and services. And these are major attractors or pulls that serve our needs, that serve trafficking needs. So what are the victims? We've got some statistics here I'd like to go through. Quite a few are from south of the equator, and some of the work that we decided to do amongst ourselves and the Polytechnic, we decided to focus on our part of the globe first. Focus on really a hemispheric approach between push and pull and where people come from and where they go to. There is a logic to that because we have to broaden we want to have any kind of impact to make a dent in this. We have to be able to look at things from a globalized scale. So we felt like a starting point would be in our own backyard. And our own backyard is really North and South America in terms of trafficking. Child trafficking, there's children are trafficked. Now, what are considered children varies. Most have signed on to Palermo Accords in terms of what is the definition of a child versus an adult, but not all. And those definitions of what children are is how they can get exploited as well, in terms of if a government particularly doesn't consider a child at a certain age, that would be a child elsewhere. So some of the exploitation means, there's about 5 million, 6 million, depending. I think this is taken from 2017 or 18. Prostitution, pornography. So you can see a number of things here. The exploitation, again, is broad. Part of this is where are people at and what are the kind of work is being engaged in. So in Africa, quite a few are trafficked into farming. Well, it would make logical sense when you consider that, depending on the country, about 60 to 70% of your GDP comes from farming. So part of it's logical. Right against the legal labor is to hide the illicit labor, and sometimes it's hiding in plain sight. So that could be part of the means here as well. How common is it? We do have, just in terms of just frequent raw numbers, where people come from. It's a problem everywhere. I think this statistic really just says, what it doesn't say, it doesn't happen where I'm at. And that's certainly not true. It happens, it happens here, like I mentioned briefly a while ago. And even I'm surprised. I was with a colleague of mine, Dr. Kate Siegfried Speller, who's my main collaborator in this effort, and John Alent, who's on the call, she's our PhD student. They all helped me put this together, and we've been working in this area. Dr. Kate and I were over in Scotland a couple of years ago talking to the Scotland Yard of Edinburgh, the Scottish Scotland Yard. And we said, well, we don't really have good numbers about what's happening in Scotland. There might be some trafficking issues here. And they said, oh, no. They said human trafficking is a major problem here. They get exploited and trafficked into car washes. So I'm not sure what the correlation or relationship between Scotland and car washes are, but that odd, nuanced fact tells me that, well, if they are aware that people are being trafficked into something as, I don't want to say it's mundane, as common as car washes, then that to me tells me that the exploitation can be much broader than just that one thing. So total trafficking conventions are much smaller. The main problem with human trafficking is being empirical. We simply don't have good data to describe the problem objectively. And it's illicit. Traffickers don't want to be found. People that are engaged in trafficking don't want to be found. That is the main problem that we all, those of us who are engaged in this, are working towards, to try to at least describe what we have. This is another map that talks about some of the subject exploitation and profiles of victims. Sexploitation is a big one. When you're talking human trafficking, some researchers really focus on the sex trafficking because depending on where they're at, that's the main exploitation device. Begging out of the forms. So, you might see some of this in plain sight. I know I've been in many of the countries where trafficking exists. Child begging, street vendors. Oftentimes, it doesn't necessarily mean that this person is being chained to a sewing machine making cotton shirts somewhere. It could be merely that they are at the complete behest and control of another person. They don't have any dignity of their own. They do not get compensated for the labor that they are engaged in. So it's a broader definition, and it's one I want to get to. So we can broaden our thinking about, well, how might we be able to engage in this? See, these are some of the flows. This comes from, I think, Polaris. There's or Palantir. There's a couple NGOs out there that are dedicated towards raising the profile of the problems of human trafficking. You can get online and see inflows and outflows. You can see where people are coming from and people are going to. And note that all the varieties of transportation are in play: air, water, land, all the above. Again, exploiting whatever means possible to leverage the resources that the location has is something that traffickers seek to do. So if it's boats, it's boats. If it's air travel, air travel. There's not necessarily one thing that traffickers won't engage in to push or pull people from one location to another. In the United States, this is definitely from Palantir. This is a heat map. And you can see on this map that it really follows the population densities of the United States, but it doesn't necessarily tell us where every traffic conviction happens, but it does tell us that some of these things are related. Where are the major labor demands? And you can see that, towards east of the Mississippi, towards the east coast of the Midwest, we have quite a few cases of trafficking. Out in the Central Valley, where we have a lot of migrant work, a lot of work in agriculture. That dominates the landscape on the other coast. Right up through Texas, we have the human trafficking corridor. And a number of years ago, there was an idea of a NAFTA highway, borderless. You don't have to stop at the border. That would run from Mexico all the way up through Chicago and parts thereabout. It did not happen. But in terms of, think about the problems of, I don't want to say unforced errors, but unforeseen consequences. Greasing the skids to make trade more efficient, which I would agree with, also means that those same principles can be exploited as well. So imagine, cross-national traffic without having to stop at all. The problem starts with being able to identify and intercede. So as we have continued to work in this globalized economy, those things present themselves as barriers to where we can look at. Here in Indiana, this is just a bigger blow-up picture of what happens in our state. Indianapolis, obviously, Indiana is mostly a rural state with a few larger population centers, but we are the crossroads of America. So we get treated as such. People get trafficked through all of our systems. I don't know if people are aware on the call, but besides having very good road infrastructure, we have very good rail infrastructure. In fact, we're close to Chicago, still in the top 10 of rail hubs in the entire world. And we have very good port structures as well. We have a port that connects Michigan that leads all the way to the Mississippi Basin. So we find ourselves in the Middle West at an intersection of this problem, if you will. So this can be an assumption busting exercise, but I think we'll save it just so I can talk about some of the myths of trafficking. And maybe it's surprising, maybe it's not. It suggests movement across states or countries. It's not necessarily required. You could be trafficked right where you're at, in the same locale. A number of years ago, I was on a study abroad into Africa. We were in, I believe, Rwanda, and we were talking to farmers who served as model farmers. And what this means is that farmers train other farmers on improved production techniques. And without any prompt, our model farmer brought up the fact that she gets support from her own family, and this makes sense, her own household. But she was very quick to say that her children, they work on the farm, but they get compensated for that, and that compensation happens both in terms monetarily and to support their education. So these children, they go to school until about 2 or 3 o'clock, and they come home and work on the farm, but they're compensated for that effort. And it struck me, why did our model farmer have to bring that up? Why did she feel compelled to bring that up? I think it's because, and this is not just to say that this happens in Rwanda, but being exploited means you can also be exploited by people that you have very good or familial connections to, which it's quite true. Oftentimes, victims are trafficked by people that they know and love, perhaps. Traffickers exerting control over the victims in a number of ways. You don't have to have physical bondage. There are threats. You can take away probably the obvious one is if you're trafficked across borders, let's say, your passport gets taken away from you. So coercion, threats. The victims, the survivor's perspective. You can't blame the victim in this case just because they did not try to escape. There are a variety of things that people who survive trafficking have gone through already that find themselves in this being exploited. So we have to make sure that we are not victim blaming it. Why didn't you just escape? That idea of just escaping. It's not as simple as that when the means by which you are coerced into either informal labor or forced labor covers a variety of psychological beyond just physical techniques. It's not just migrant smuggling as well. Earlier in the chat, a number of you mentioned you saw the variety of human trafficking modes, and people can actually be trafficked within their own hometowns, with their own communities. I don't want to get too repetitive here. victims do not consent to human trafficking, but there might be such a problem where if you are being asked to do work against your will, coerced into work, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to immediately seek help or even understand what is happening to you. If there's a coercion technique and you are working and you find that you're not being compensated or your dignity has been stolen, it's not necessarily a flashbulb moment. I don't know the survivor literature as well, but what I do know is sometimes there's a tipping point, but sometimes there is not. And it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water phenomena. By the time you realize what has happened to you, it's too late until you can survive or actually get out of the situation or be found to get out of the situation. With regards to, I think this is a redundant slide. It only happens in the legal underground industries. This happens in the formal economy as well. So a little bit of my background is supply chain too. And in my prior life, I built quality management systems. And these are systems that organizations adopt in which they build a management system and how they're going to work, actually how they are going to do things around a set of principles. Quality management systems are built around quality principles. But what I was not really aware of until a couple of years ago, that I was talking to somebody from the State Department, there are initiatives that are built around social compliance management systems. These are management systems that organizations adopt to ensure social compliance with their nation's goals with regard to work. And the idea of social compliance is that you will comply with goals that prevent you or keep you from engaging in forms of human exploitation that you might otherwise engage in. In fact, most people on the call, you've probably touched the product, perhaps purchased the product, seen a product that has had some sort of illicit labor involved in it. We have, along with management systems, there are supply chain ideas. You've probably seen or purchased a product that's based upon some sort of consumer characteristic. You bought something because of a fair trade label, because it was traded fairly, that the person gets a fair wage, or a bird-free coffee, where the coffee was made, was produced in the country in which birds were not killed, netted, to prevent the cherries being plucked away and the farmer not being able to grow coffee. Consumers send signals to the market all the time. And these labeling schemas are meant to ensure transparency and not just the characteristic of the product or service, like I'm buying fruit that's not bruised, but I'm buying fruit that doesn't have illicit labor in it or in which the person's been fairly compensated. So we have a mixture of illicit products that get into the market with products that are legal. And so being able to sort out what's illicit and what's not illicit is a problem. So labeling schemas, international standards of organization, voluntary standards, management systems, these are some ways that we try to make sure that we have compliance in our system. I know a couple individuals that work in this field where they're trying to make sure that their supply chain is in compliance. And I'm probably being redundant because over the past few years, some of these things have risen to the popular that the popular culture understands. The sweatshops, people working in textiles, Nike. Companies don't want illegal product and labor in their supply chains. It's bad business. It's just bad. Not just bad business. So there are a number of ways to try to ensure this. Women and girls are not the only people that are trafficked. Males, it's perceived that perhaps maybe as many as half victims are male. I think on a slide a little bit later is that traffickers like to use the gender of the victim that they seek to traffic. Males trafficking males, women trafficking women, not just men trafficking women like in the movies, or maybe vice versa as well. People that live in the margins that are particularly vulnerable could find themselves vulnerable to trafficking as well. So the LGBTQ community, boys, just a couple instances in which, if you're already vulnerable based upon your societal, where you fit in the society, can be particularly vulnerable, targeted for trafficking. And traffickers know often they're victims and vice versa. People that are trafficked by family. The survivor that we had at our 150th event, she was trafficked by family. She was abroad, and I'll tell her story in a minute, but she was trafficked by family members into this country. So I've talked about this a little bit, but let me talk about the bigger concept of push and pull. So push factors. Push factors push people out into trafficking. Some of the examples, I talked about gaps, poverty. That you're impoverished and you seek a better life. You have to go elsewhere to eliminate your poverty-stricken livelihood or support others. Oppression, human rights, a lack of social. These are conditions, and the key term is local, that force people, that push them out. They're looking for a better life. They're looking for better conditions elsewhere. Pull factors. So it goes the other way as well. There's signals to people, to pools in their communities that pull them. Incentives in destination countries. The variety of labor availability. So if you live in a country which there really is not just work, but work that you can live on. And you might see, we live in a global information age. The United States is an obvious one. We need labor, and we're retiring out millions of people every year. We need to replace that labor. The only thing right now, unless things change, is that's going to come from an immigrant population. So that's a huge attractor. And so there are pull factors too. So there are a number of different things, number of different examples that muddy the waters here. We can't, right now, all you see is a list, okay? I can't tell you with great detail, which push and pull factors are significantly different from others based upon whatever local conditions there are. So that nuance, that granularity in the data, I don't have personally, and I think that's something that those of us, like me, that are trying to be empirical about it, that would be information that is greatly needed. So kind of to sum it up a little bit, that's what you're doing, plus the mode, how you're doing it, including the purpose by which you're doing it. This is a simple equation, but you could see there's quite a few, I would say probably permutations here that equate to human trafficking. So it's not simply Liam Neeson trying to save his daughter in the movie. There's a variety of ways that people are trafficked. It often starts with events. And I wrote a grant a few years ago. We didn't get funded, but it's still a good idea. Talking about large events. Large events bring lots of people together, including those who seek to exploit the event. You can hide in a crowd. And so one of those events is the Super Bowl. Indianapolis became a human trafficking center after it hosted the Super Bowl. I think it's been about 6 or 8 or 10 years ago. One thing with the Super Bowl I do know, which is not a lot, but you have to have a considerable amount of hoteling space. So part of this process, what we know, is you have to have space by which you can traffic people. So a vast inflation of space, even if it's temporary, which is better yet, Airbnb or otherwise, this provides opportunity. People that want to seek temporary work go to a sporting event. The key term is it's event. But after the event has passed, the trafficking and the trafficking process can stay in place. So it is, and I believe on here there is an active campaign. This is knowledgeable amongst the law enforcement community, maybe not as widely known among others, but part of what I'll get to later is what we can do is we can just try to make ourselves more aware of the circumstances that people are in, and this becoming a voice campaign is to generate awareness that problems follow sporting events, including human trafficking. Hurricane Katrina is another example. Victims were recruited. Again, this was a shelter, but literal shelter in this time, not for hoteling. And the federal government was involved with regards to trying to get our vast oil infrastructure, which mostly resides in the peninsula region between Galveston, Texas, in south of New Orleans. So you have both a lot of pull factors in this case, and some push factors too. So some of those people are pushed into poverty, pushed into homelessness. That can happen all in a single place. So I believe this is a screen grab from a particular news article about that. So prevention. So what can be done? There's something called the Palermo Accords, the 4 Ps, and the UN came up with this framework. It's older than I believe in 2016, but there's 4 broad goals with prevention efforts, which is prosecution. Of course, you have to be able to find those to prosecute in the first place. So it almost starts with identification and definition. Protection, which again, whom to protect requires, again, going back to understand who can be trafficked, being able to identify those persons. Prevention techniques themselves, this is really a signaling that we need a civic response to something like human trafficking. We need civics. We need a citizenry to be aware of something like this. If you've been through an airport, an international airport over the last, I'd say 10 years, you perhaps have seen posters in which that they're trying to generate awareness of what victims, survivors of human trafficking might look like. That's all of us, getting involved in this effort. And finally, partnership. The one thing that traffickers exploit is the differences in not just law enforcement, but just governance and being able to exploit those gaps. So being able to collaborate and partner and develop better holistic, and I'm speaking to the right clad, systematic work amongst geographic locations, countries, municipalities, nationalities. This is another key to reducing this problem of trafficking. So one particular example, this is a familiar example. A person trafficked his daughter into a dorm in 2010. Moved into his daughter's dorm. Every time I read this, it's surprising. But acted as a father figure, served as like a sensei of sorts, like a person to look up to. Manipulated that idea in terms that they could be a person that were knowledgeable, that could be helpful, exploit people, and he attracted a number of victims, moved them into an apartment, used a lot of means of coercion, physical means, psychological. Again, the toolkit for traffickers. They use whatever means possible to coerce people. And then when payment couldn't occur, force them to obtain money any way possible. So that includes them turning over, parents' information. While a mortgage might be a parent's largest asset, being able to account for that liquidity elsewhere, checking book accounts, credit cards, etc., prostitution, forced labor, whatever can make money for the trafficker, whatever is profitable is the key here. And then moved around, basically a transient. That's part of it, is to be able to exploit those differences, not being able to be found, and just move around. And once you pull a person out of their familiar circumstances, they can become very attached to the person that moved them out of those circumstances. So, I don't have to talk to anybody on the call. When you're in a strange place, when you're not knowledgeable of your surrounding environment, people, place, etc., you become dependent on more systematic things that can be exploited. So this happened over a number of years, I think about a decade, and quite a bit of money was involved. So the stories are out there. Part of it is just part of my challenge is constantly keeping an open mind in terms of what what people can possibly do to other people. So the whom? What is the trafficker profile? So they're motivated by profit, where to make money, and how to do it with as least risk to them as possible. This is the basic goal: is to make money. An individual, yes, but individuals have to work together in a concerted effort. And I'm going to get to the more of the systems approach here. But they have to knowingly participate in it as well. So that's typically the trafficker profile. to be considered a human trafficker. Another role, and I'm going to go through a number of roles here because it's going to lead to some of the other. It's perspective giving. So, you can help me I can help you understand where we're going with some of the work we're doing. So another role in this is a recruiter, someone who can recruit a person. Usually, again, whatever means possible, but it's the promise. It's the promise of better life, and that's underlying promise. Talk is cheap. Some cases of abduction's part of it, but again, the coercion modes are limitless, it seems. And then often, like I mentioned before, have a personal relationship. Have a relationship. And it can be very personal or just a relationship in general, but that can be part of the exploitation. Coercive recruiting strategies, I think I mentioned these before. Maybe a couple I didn't. Debt bondage is one. You're working in that person's debt. Think an indentured servitude. I mean, this is an old concept, but it is a concept that is used. Isolating that person, pulling them away from people they know, out of a community they're aware of, into different circumstances. Just isolation. And don't have to speak to too many of us that in the last year of going through self-quarantine, how isolating things can be. Being surveilled, withholding payment, threatening obviously a person, contract substitution, exploitation of status. I mentioned talking about withholding a visa or travel documentation. Whatever you can do to make sure that person stays in your control. Now, the same person can serve any of these roles, but different people can serve different roles as well. So you might find that the person's a trafficker, recruiter, transporter all in one. We might have a separate transporter as well. Transporters are the movement. They use mostly mass transportation, but again, they'll exploit whatever means possible. Flexibility is key. Being practical is key. Whatever gets the job done with as little awareness from law enforcement as possible. Buses and trains examples, there's less security, it's harder. Cash is especially useful because it's liquidity, and oftentimes identification is poor or non-existent. So, there's a difference between riding Amtrak today and flying on an airplane. So, the transport also, air travel is not out of the question. I thought about this initially. I'm like, wow, air travel is really difficult. I don't know how anybody can be trafficked, across borders. Well, people are all the time, trafficked through airports, through aircraft. It's surprising to me when I think of coming from a manufacturing background, the scale you need to create illicit labor. But you don't have to be transporting an army of people across the border. People are trafficked typically one at a time, I believe. So, payment with cash for tickets, constant monetization. These are some of the attributes that, if you would happen to see these posters, besides trying to be able to figure out, the profile of a survivor, is by what means is that person affiliated with the person they're traveling with? Okay, a lot of questions and answers. The person takes care of everything for the other person. So these are some of the nuances. And like I mentioned before, that it can be very individualistic. I should probably take a breath, and my wife's laughing. So can I stop? And does anybody have it? I can't see the chat. I'm in presentation mode. But is there anything in the chat so far while I stop and breathe? All right, I've done my faculty 5-second wait, and I will continue. Other roles, exploitation. We have exploiters, a wide range of actors. Again, flexibility, I think, and goal-mindedness. We can think of them as end users, as customers, but being exploited requires a wide variety of actors to be involved with. And some of these, I think, are considered textbook definitions. We might have a supervisor, This might be a person, once they've been trafficked, they are the surveiller. So they surveil the person, they take their wages, they make sure that person is in continued coercion, again, maintaining control. And then you might have a separate manager. It depends on how complicated the traffic network is and what products or services are people are engaging in. So could have someone that's literally just on the money end of things. It could include money laundering, although I don't know how significant, how big that is in terms of laundering money. I mean, you launder money for illicit work, but if you are forcing labor for legitimate work, you don't need to launder money to do so. I mean, you can exploit current wage and labor laws to do so, to make money you need. Organizational structures. So again, you can have all manner of structure, and this is part of. I come from the business world originally, engineering, working in businesses, and part of the thesis that my colleagues and I have is, this is big business, underlying business. So the idea that you organize yourself to engage in trafficking, these are some of the different general hierarchies, but I would not say this is an exhaustive list. Traffickers engage in all manner of command structures, all measure of management structures, and so it is making sure that the resources that you're using to traffic, you can exploit, just like in business. These resources, what is going to get me the best bang for my buck, so to speak? What is the most efficient means possible to do so? So I feel like in terms of the literature, we're just starting to crack some of these things, because computer information technology is basically pervasive in every field of endeavor and vice versa. So in our department, we have a variety of disciplines. I'm an engineer. We have psychologists. We have cybersecurity specialists. We have programmers. We have lots of different people from a variety of expertise. And part of doing interdisciplinary research, which this is for me, this is not all I do, but this is interdisciplinary research that I do, a main thrust of it. Now, I was talking with Kate, and Kate is from a law enforcement background. Her career has in cybersecurity and law enforcement, and she's a psychologist by training, and she explained to me what she did, and I basically nodded my head, and I'm like, I built locomotives, Kate. I built power generation systems. This is what I did. So we got to talking, and it's like you start with trying to understand someone else's field in addition to your own, which is hard enough, which makes interdisciplinary work not just, yes, it has high impact, but it takes a long time to do, and it's rigorous. So Kate and I were talking about what we each did, and one day she happened to see an article about the social compliance system that I mentioned, and this was a grant that the Department of State was asking for higher education, well, just not higher eds, but NGOs, to build social compliance systems to mitigate human trafficking. And so she sends this to me because she had heard the words management system. And she's like, what does this mean to quality? Ha, ha, ha. And I look at the article she sent me, and I'm like, well, I'll be darned. I said, I know what a management system is, but I've never heard of a social compliance system in my life. What is this thing? And I start reading through this, and I sent her a text message back, and I said, Kate, I said, I think we've got something that we can cross our boundaries on. You know about what they're seeking to mitigate. I know the device and the mechanisms they're trying to use to do that mitigation strategy. Why don't we figure out a way to work together? So unfortunately, in a grant like that, it requires considerable legwork and existing partnerships. So we ran out of time, really. We ran up until the end trying to find a partner that we could work with. So a lot of work in this research proposals in the space require engagement, and you've got to know who's working in that space. We know a lot of those people working in that space then. We didn't then. Kate wasn't the human trafficking expert. She was involved in sexual exploitation by other means, by cybersecurity means. So we didn't know the actors in this space and who typically works in the space, like Polaris and Palantir and some of the other organizations. Now, we know a couple, but so we ran out of space to get that grant in, but we had started with a foundation. And so when the 150th anniversary came around, the dean knew what we were doing. We hadn't planned on doing anything, and he said, I know what you're trying to do in this space. This is blue water space. This is open space. We think you should do this, even though you didn't get the grant. So we put together a 150th grant, and the third person on there, Dr. Menser, who was the third leg in this in terms of what we wanted to use at the time, which was design thinking. So we had a team, came together. This came from a lot of units. We got about 30 to 40,000 in funding. We were funded by the Center for Food Security, the Purdue Peace Project. I think it is, Discovery Park. We got monies just from Discovery Park, Cook Biomedical. We engaged everybody we can think of, and we just started cold calling people. To try to find experts, we just looked them up and we just started calling, just literally calling people. Don't email, don't just call, just actually call somebody. And what I remember most from this is that everybody that we asked to get involved said yes. And I don't think it was us. I don't think I'm that great of a salesman. I think it was the thing that we were engaged in. And it was intriguing enough that maybe we could actually pull it off. So we got some monies from our own college as well. We put this event together. I think probably everybody that was involved from a student aspect was graduated by now. But this was a flyer. Kate and I ran. This was very labor intensive. This took a long time to do. We put this flyer together. And we just said, come. We made this an open event. So all the 150th events were signature events. But what we wanted to do, we knew that this problem is in everybody's community. We wanted this to be a community event. So we invited the community. We made sure that reached out to both mayors' offices, and both mayors came. Both mayors served as mentors. All three chiefs of police served as mentors. Community members. We had the Human Trafficking Task Force from Indianapolis that was put together, that's run from ISP. They came up. So we were pretty proud of the ingredients, which was people. We needed people. And so what we did is we basically, this is a couple screenshots you can see a panel with our experts. We had an economist that deals with poverty economics. She came up from Mexico, and the university escapes me. I think it's on here. Shay has since moved on elsewhere, but we had I think it's in the notes. You can see the agenda here. Some of the police. This is what some of the student teams. So what we did first is we taught. We taught about what the problem is. We gave them broad themes. Here's what human trafficking is. And we gave them a survivor's perspective. Tabby was the victim I was talking about, the survivor I was talking about from Bloomington. She agreed to come up, courageous woman. She spoke about her story. She was living overseas. I don't recall which country Tabby is from, but her family, some of her family members that lived in Bloomington, told her that they could get her a better job here, and they got her onto an airplane. They got her here. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. So many cores of means. Tabby was promised to become a student at IU, and I believe that she was admitted. She was going to be admitted as a student, but she had to come because they were going to, she was going to be a student on IU's campus. She was trafficked. She got on an airplane. She came. She met up with family members. She was trafficked by family members off campus into a house. where she served as a domestic servant until she was rescued about 18 months later. She had lost, she was down to about 90 pounds. She was in poor health. She actually at one point was taken to the hospital for healthcare issues. The hospital did not pick it up that she was a victim of human trafficking. So that was a huge miss because that is one of the, if you're an engineer, you know about exploitation points, you know where do you pull the big lever. That was one of those exploitation points that was missed and finally rescued. So she gave a survivor's perspective. Happened right here, was front page of Indy Star, and that's actually where what we found Tebby is Kate had remembered her from the front page, and I think I'd seen her. It was doubled over into the Exponent as well. We had a panel discussion. We had a supply chain expert come. We had a victim advocate. So it was really, let's talk about what trafficking is. And then my colleague, Dr. Mincer, with a couple other colleagues, Dr. Laux and Mr. Sean Farrington, they had designed the gateway course for the College of Technology, Purdue Polytechnic, which is our Tech 120 course teaches design thinking. So if you're a student from the Polytechnic, you've been through this course, we taught the students that came because we wanted to attract a diversity of student population. They taught them the ideation process and how do you solve problems from a social technical perspective. And then we basically said, go. You've got 24 hours to come up with your best idea. They had to submit a 1-minute video, I think by 8 a.m. the next morning. So we got space from across campus, TLI amongst others, where the students could work all night, and they did. We brought in, I remember my daughter was especially impressed by the fact that I bought $2,000 worth of Moe's during the evening to feed the students. This is some of them working. And they first met with their mentors. The mentors helped kick them off, and away they went. And we had submissions all the way up to 8 a.m. the next morning. I remember I and some of the other panelists, we wandered off to eat. We had a late dinner. We hung around. We came back around midnight, 12:30 or 1, floating around TLI over in Young Hall. There's like 90 students still on the floor, pounding away. So this, if you've been a part of a hackathon, this is kind of the hack part of that event. This was not a hackathon, but that by me for more familiar. So we're publishing this as a paper. At least I think we are. We've written it, we submitted it, and it looks like we've passed the first round. This is the rubric we adopted. It was extremely difficult to judge these. Such great ideas from the students. We had great difficulty the next morning in deciding who are our top 3 prize winners. We did give out monetary awards. I think the first prize was $5,000, the second prize was $3,000, third prize was like $1,500. We had over 300 attendees. We had over 200 students. These represented 90 majors, almost half of the majors on this campus. Well, less than half now. 25 successful submissions. I mean, I was stunned with some of the work I saw. And that's part of that higher education approach is we've got the horsepower. We've got that right here. Let's turn it on. Let's see what you can do. This was the first, second, third place teams. These were the majors. The majors they're involved. Look at the variety here. We had applied statistics, Chem E. I mean, just all over the board. That was really what was great, is that convergence, that centering from those students using what they know from their discipline to utilize to attack this problem. It was wonderful. So a bit about design thinking. I won't harp on it. We didn't get a really prototype and test. I mean, that's the closing the loop. But this was really what our instructors taught them, was understanding, definition, being able to empathize, and then ideate, generating your ideas. So this is very much first quantity, then quality. They really focused on, when I put my engineering hat on, in risk assessment, identification, or what we would call detection. So the majority focused on detection, which I thought was kind of interesting. I wish we'd have been a little bit more, a little bit more organized about how we analyzed what the students did. but from a broad framework of risk assessment, they focus primarily, a lot of them, on detection. And some of these videos, they are out there on Purdue Libraries. They are still there. You could go out and look at them. I could follow up later and provide links, and we could talk about it. So we were trying to make sure that, so the event went off. Where did we go from there? This is some of Kate's work. I'd be remiss without talking about it. Kate and a colleague, Dr. Ray's. Dr. Ray's, her specialty is in, oh gosh, what is her specialty? It's in natural language processing. Thank you. I'm getting an assist from the other Dr. Laux. They got together and put together a chat tool. This oftentimes sexual exploitation is through chats. So they have an engine they've put together where you can analyze based on the probability that there is going to be an attempted sexual exploitation. And this is free. I'd be remiss without talking about it. They are translating it into multiple languages. I think the last one I heard of was Spanish, which is an obvious one. I mean, if you know Spanish and English, you can talk to more than half the world's population. So that's more of Kate's background. It's called the CAT. I think they call it the CAT tool or chat tool. I'm not sure. But they could tell the differences based upon when there's going to be an attempted contact. I think if the word is. I'm moving fast because I want to get to Q&A, and I don't want to just do all the talking. This is a study that I piloted. I had a student, a visiting scholar, took my Six Sigma class a few years ago, and Kate and I were first talking about this, and she was looking to work on a Six Sigma project for social good, and this is an emerging area in my field. We mostly work on operations excellence, but operations excellence to do what? Not just practical implications, but social implications. So Laura wanted to work on a project like that, and I said, you know, you're taking my class, I'm working with Kate on this problem. Why don't we see if it's even feasible to utilize the principles of Six Sigma to attack this problem? So what we did is we looked at our curricula and basically went through and said, this is not a project per se, but the problem we're trying to solve is how do we understand it as a business? What does it look like? And then how do we induce it to fail? Usually as an engineer, you want to build a system up to make sure it doesn't fail. We want to take that technique and we want to make it fail. You know, we want to turn it on its head. So we pulled the guts out of it, which is the root cause analysis, which is a smaller meta process. And what we did is we mapped it from the literature. So we scanned the literature, did a systematic lit review. We built a business process map, you know, a general business process map on how we think human trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, works in the Midwest in the United States. And then from that, we recruited 3 experts, an academic that studies this, a police officer that works in this, and a survivor's advocate that deals with the outcome of this. And we taught them how to, we taught them a failure modes and effects analysis and what's called a cause and effect matrix. And then we asked them to create a FMEA, is the right way to say it, for sex trafficking. And so this is about looking at sex trafficking from a business. We're in that top portion, understanding the business. We're trying to understand how it might work as a business. And our research objectives, these were the specific ones. On the right-hand side, these are the techniques. Identify relevant techniques, develop material, recruit our SMEs. So this was a qualitative study, quasi-qualitative study. If you're familiar with FMEA, it's reliant upon what's called a multidisciplinary decision-making approach. So it's very important to have the right ingredients, and the right ingredients are your SMEs. Do they know? Do they have the knowledge to actually do a FMEA that is accurate and precise? It came from the Air Force. You know, this was developed by the Air Force to understand how aircraft systems fail. When they're moving from propeller to jet, things became more complicated. How do we figure out how these aircraft fail, and how do we prevent that from happening? So now we're applying it towards sex trafficking. but it's been widely adopted in a lot of different fields, not just this one. So this is just a template. And this literally comes from my class. I'm teaching this to them next week, I think. Not on sex trafficking, but as pertains to their particular project. So it might be familiar to most on the call. It's a pretty conventional engineering technique, but this is completely unknown way of thinking to law enforcement. So it goes to that idea of that systems thinker. I don't think I have that slide on here, that we want to break down silos. You know, we want to break down silos and looking through our narrow lens and broaden and look at things in a more of a relationship characteristic. And so while I would assume that people might know what this is or heard of it, my colleagues in law enforcement are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why would I study human trafficking from a business approach? That's interesting. Would that work? So we've got some initial results. Now, for those who have done them, they are very rigorous and they take a long time to do. And it's simply more information than we could put in a single article. We put it on Open Science Framework. You can go and download them and look at them. I've got to do a little bit of adjusting with, they're not appendices anymore, they're standalone. But you can see the three for me is that are three people put together. These are the top 3 failure modes as they see it, as pertains to the business process map that they were given. And we felt like what we're really trying to do is it feasible to use these techniques? We felt like yes, that our results demonstrated that these could work. Now, we are enlarging this project because we kept it small. We didn't know if it would even work. And, purely taking theory from one thing and putting in another. We've enlarged it. We've engaged with, we have a current group of law enforcement, mostly FBI, out of the St. Louis office, because they do quite a bit of work in this area because of the intersections of, human trafficking passes through St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, Chicago. These are major hubs for trafficking. So we've recruited a number of SMEs that know about trafficking. We're going to teach them the same methodology, but we're going to be a little bit more determined about the methodologies that we're going to use. So we've got a competency survey that we're going to do pre and post. We're going to give them the map. We're going to teach them the techniques. Then they're going to build the map. We're going to make comparisons, and then we're going to, what we'd like to do is obviously publish and see what this produces. Continue to work on the viability aspect. And then finally, and this is where the collaboratory comes into play, we have put all these efforts together that I talked about, the design challenge, the Six Sigma techniques, a higher education approach. We've put this all together in a combined grant. We've combined all these in a systematic way. And we've got a so far pending proposal. So NSF, I've got about 15, 20 minutes if you want to stay in a call longer. NSF, their directorate, their operations engineering directorate, a couple years ago said, you know what? What can we do from an engineering perspective to combat illicit supply chains? So I pulled this RFP down and I told Kate, I said, this was written. I think this was written for us. And they first started as a Dear Colleague letter. What this means is that the directorate at NSF, they have some extra money. They can apply it to whatever they want. So they created a Dear Colleague letter. They did that last year. They funded about 16 projects, everything from illegal forestry to, I don't think human trafficking was in there. Not that I saw. I didn't see the project that we proposed, but like illegal products, forest products, animal products, farming, to education. I mean, the variety of proposals was really amazing to see what people were coming up with. So they funded those projects. They put out an RFP this year. We partnered up. We wanted to look at that partnership and that systems approach between push and pull. Colombia, I know a number of NGOs down there. We have a couple of their colleagues here. Their comments are, Colombians are brilliant people. They're also some of the best human traffickers in the world. And Colombia is a wonderful country, but they have a very high interdisplaced population, meaning you're displaced within your own country. Not even talking about the migrants coming over from Venezuela have really been pushed out of the country and pulled into the rest of South America. So, and of course, they've suffered a 40-year civil war. So, the push and pull factors between Colombia and the United States are strong, both in product and labor. So, Una Nortes is University of the North. In Barranquilla, I have a colleague. She's the chair of industrial engineering down there. So we have what we call a higher ed approach to solving this problem that combines all those things that we just talked about. University of Denver, he's one of our experts that came. He studies human trafficking, Oliver Kaplan. He studies this and collects some of the analytics. So the three of us have partnered together to put this proposal out there. And, fingers crossed, we're still in the running for it. And even if we don't get this, we're going to do something because we believe the idea has merit. So, okay. I've talked way too long. I never talk this long in lecture. My students know that. They get too bored with me. So I am going to just open it up for any kind of questions and answers. And, thank you for your time so far. So I'm going to leave the presentation mode and bring it back. I'll stop sharing my screen. How about that? We'll stop there. So, and I think there's some things in the chat. So, oh, okay. I haven't missed anything. So, yeah. Questions, answers, comments.
Thanks so much for this talk.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It was a really eye-opening talk. I mean, a whole lot of details. I'm glad I have the slides for that. So I'm really glad I have the slides. Thank you so much. If anyone has any question, please feel free to chime in and just, ask your question. The floor is yours.
Everybody might be out of gas. I will say, I mean, it's a big deck, and feel free to disseminate. What you're seeing is 3-4 years of work. I mean, starting a new area of research is hard. Doing it cross disciplines can be especially vexing. So and you just have to keep working at it. And so this is very much, a work in progress.
Yes. Yeah, well, I have a question to start out with. I mean, probably, I guess, after my question, I guess other questions can start flowing in. I mean, you've been in this research for a while, and I guess I just want to ask a question about, I don't want to say successful approaches because, I mean, these things are still going on, but some solution approaches you've seen towards, combating trafficking generally. Do you think they actually, because you shared a slide that showed us a whole lot of things that feed into trafficking, which is quite a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of interconnections. So do you think these solution approaches, I mean, at least the good ones, the good ones you've seen so far, how much of these interconnections and these interrelationships do they really capture? Because again, you're thinking in the systems perspective, trying to find solutions to a whole lot of
So how many have we actually captured in terms of those interconnecting points? It is a work in progress. What we have found thus far with regards to the interconnections is that we are still at the point of trying to understand how things connect to each other in a systematic way. So using a relationship diagramming map from what we call a process approach, we're still, I think, are we asking the right questions first? I don't know if we have really good answers as of yet. What I can say is that the topic is worth working on, and that's important to answer in its own right. and that's important to solicit and be able to sustain the work. The engagement we've had with others in other disciplines like law enforcement, what we have found is that we need to be building stronger partnerships between ourselves and those that are working in the problem. And we don't have, we're just, I would say still, maybe it's a bad term, coalition building phase. You know, everybody is enthusiastic about it. How do you make that purposeful, and what's going to work? We've generated, there is enthusiasm. We're in the midst of some work, but I can't say with, 95 or even 90% confidence that, some of the techniques we've identified will actually exploit the problem. We have not gotten to what I would call the action research stage yet. And, I'm just trying to make sure I don't want to inflate what we've done. I want to have a perspective that what we've done is a small nick at this. But the idea, what I want to be able to answer for myself is, do I think my discipline has a part to play in this problem? Possibly. Yes, I think so. And I think some of the things that we've done thus far, what I'm hearing and what we have not captured as of yet qualitatively, but we have done in more of an anecdotal and story making mode. And storytelling is important. But what I've heard, what we've captured anecdotally from our SMEs is that this needs to be pursued. This way, this kind of approach needs to be part of. This is not a silver bullet. Silver bullets are for mythical creatures. This is part of a technique in which it could be part of someone who is involved in this problem directly could possibly utilize. So that's what I know, and which is not much yet. So I want to be cautious in terms of what we've done, and it seems like a lot, and it is. It's taken a lot of work to get this point, but we're out of 10 steps. We're at step 2, maybe. We're still asking questions. What we're writing about, what the results we get, produces more questions. So, and I'm okay with that, because I think good research, you gotta have good questions first. That's almost more interesting than the answers, because there's continuity, and we're never really done with it. So, so we're beyond the enthusiasm phase, and we're in the midst of it. We are in the weeds on this. So I see something from the chat. I'm not sure this was already covered up, but have you worked with any specific? Yeah, we have worked with a few. So we have worked with the National Child Hotline, and we had one of our panelists was from there. We have also reached out, and as a part of a grant mechanism, we have a number of support letters from Colombian partners. And these partners, now part of this is the promise of proposed work, but what we have is support from, say, the palm oil industry in Colombia. We have support from some of the largest manufacturers who have told us, we have child labor in our supply chain. We need help to fix this problem. So, when they told us this, I thought, do I need to disclose this to somebody? Did someone just tell me something I need to report? I don't think so. I think it's more of a general thing. But we have, some of the companies that we've solicited to help us that have promised support. We do this work between us and Colombia. Have told us flat out they have illicit labor producing legitimate products in their supply chains. So not just NGOs but companies too. This takes a lot of different actors. Those who are actually working on the problem from a non-government organization, government organization, but the marketplace plays a big part too, because of that attraction of cheap goods and services and some of those other push and pull factors I mentioned earlier. What are some of the challenges you face while collecting data on this topic? So the research is all over the place. There is not necessarily a human trafficking journal. When you talk about problems of this magnitude, kind of a global challenge, the literature is in a lot of different endeavors. And in fact, I think we're finding some difficulty where to put some of this literature. Do we put what we have found in engineering literature? Do we, and engineers would say, well, okay, I know what a FME is, but what is this human trafficking business? This doesn't, fit. Or do we put it more with law enforcement, criminal justice? And they go, okay, we understand trafficking, but what is this engineering and what is process and approach and what is mapping and what do you mean? What are you talking about? What are diamonds and boxes? What are these things and these arrows mean? So this doesn't fit. And this is part of the, I would say the downside of interdisciplinary work, because we literally, as academics, our expertise can get so narrow to the point where that the practicality of what we're trying to do gets lost. And we're trying to do things that are also practical. That this is very much use-inspired research. We are not Niels Bohr trying to understand the phenomena of an atom just for the sake of an atom. It's much more like Louis Pasteur. How do we take the science and what we know and use it purposefully to improve the human condition? This is the kind of research that's kind of a hallmark, not just in our college, but I think across many of us in the university. That can make it really hard to find a place where you put it. So collecting the data from our SMEs has not been a problem. The enthusiasm is there. When we ask, they say yes. This is something that they know is important, they're aware of, and anything we could do to make a dent in this. So that's not been a challenge necessarily. Now, becoming more empirical, and I think my colleagues on the law enforcement side would say this is, how exactly does this happen? What's the cycle time? How many interactions are there? What are the process steps? What are the decision-making points? These are all basic things that if you were building a process and say in an organization, just fundamental. These are the things that we have. Those are the challenges. Being empirical, that is the challenge. That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer, but it's a complicated question, so it's going to require a complicated response.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laux. I mean, let's see. Any questions? Any other question? I know someone might be burning with a question. Any
Yeah, thank you
questions?
too.
Yeah.
Thank you too. I know evenings can be busy for people. Thanks for hanging on and listening to me drone on. Appreciate
Wow.
it. And we get people who are interested and enthusiastic about it. I mean, if you're interested in it, just reach out to myself. If the collaboratory, I'd be remiss without mentioning the support of the collaboratory. They wrote us a great support letter that if we get the grant, we will actually be creating a course in the collaboratory to basically attack the problem. So this is that higher education approach I was talking about. We're going to use our material, our ingredients are the students, faculty, the resources that we have from the university to do it. So, and we'll be collaborating with our colleagues, not only in my college in IE or in the collaboratory, but in Nuno Nortis as well. So I'd be remiss without thanking the collaborators, the collaboratory collaborators here for their support so far in this. So.
Wow, that's, yeah. I mean, I guess that's something to really, really, wait. And I hope this can really, really, this can get to materialize pretty soon, because
Yeah.
that will be really, really interesting to know. I mean, I feel like this topic for tonight, we couldn't finish up. It's like there's still a whole lot of things to explore, but I know time is not um a friend. I mean, time is not on our side. But really, it was really awesome having you with us today, Dr. Laux. It was, I mean,
Yeah, thank you. I
I
appreciate
feel we
working with
might
you guys.
still, call you back as, as as your work progresses, because
Yeah,
you said you're still in the early phases of the work, but I know as
yeah,
things progress, I hope we can always call on you to um, share updates on what's really happening, because this is a really interdisciplinary work, and it's a wicked problem, really. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Very
for your time, and I believe we all had a great time. Professor
Super.
Kenley, I don't know if you have
No, it was an
anything.
excellent introduction to us all. I sent Chad an email to tell him what part of the space I thought he was in, and some
Yeah.
words of wisdom from people who deal with very complex systems that would remark that they're doing the right things at this stage.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Kenley. You know, you've mentioned that system. It's like we need to understand the system so we can pull it apart and then put something better back together.
Yes, so you've got a ways to go.
A ways to go, yeah, and that's okay too.
All right.
We're on one building a day, but appreciate it.
One quick thing, Dr. Kenley, do you want to mention the fellowship program,
Yeah.
Yes.
the call for nominations?
Yes, we have a call for nominations for doctoral fellows who are essentially sort of past their prelims. And this fellowship, they get half their funding from the collaboratory and half from their major professors, plural. It will require co-advisors from 2 different colleges. And Kat, is that on the homepage of the collaboratory? You can find a link to how to apply.
It's on the fellows page, yes, of our collaboratory page.
Okay. So purdue.edu/collaboratory, go to the fellows page, doctoral students who are at the point where they can apply. It's a great opportunity. And the faculty love it because they're only paying half of your bill. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a twofer.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad. Appreciate it.
All right.
Super. Well, I'm really glad you're doing this, and keep up the good work. I'll be back either as a part of it or just as an observer. So it's great work that's happening in the collaboratory. So glad to be part of it.
You bet.
Wow. Thanks so much. And more information about this, we'll post it on our group me chat. So
Sure.
yeah, if you're interested, just shoot me an email,
Yeah.
and I can easily add you to the chat. So I'm talking to the remaining people on call, and we'll post this information about the Purdue Systems Fellows. We'll post that information just so you can have more information on that, and hopefully apply if you feel you're qualified for that. So thanks a lot, Dr. Laux, for tonight. It was nice having
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you next time. Do have a great time to the semester. And to everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. It was nice having you. Do have a great time to the semester too. Bye everyone.
Super.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.